I want to record a few observations thinking about some of the similarities and differences between the self-inquiry method of Ramana Maharshi and the more traditional knowledge or jnana yoga of more conventional Advaita Vedanta. Now, superficially, it might seem like these have different angles because in the traditional Advaita Vedanta, the student is told to meditate on meaning of the scriptures. And the kinds of scriptures that the student is told to meditate on are basically about discerning the self from the non-self. Self being that which is unchanging, the non-self being all the things that are changing. And so the qualified seeker, who already is supposed to have a very quiet mind per traditional Advaita Vedanta, goes and listens to the differences propounded by the scriptures about how one is not the body, is not the emotions, is not the intellect, is not even the sense of being an experiencer or doer, or even the sense of being a witness. The self is that which is beyond all of that, which is aware of all of that, aware of even awareness and unawareness. And by meditating on those conclusions, the idea is knowledge arises. And that knowledge is the knowledge of the self. But that knowledge is not logical knowledge. And so, because it's not logical knowledge, because the self is not an object which can be understood or grasped by the mind and the intellect, the actual way of putting into effect these instructions about discerning the changing from the unchanging turns out to be very similar to what Ramana Maharshi recommends in his idea of self-inquiry. And his idea of self-inquiry is that one goes into the sense of I and looks for it. And when one looks for the sense of I, knowing that the I is what is aware of all the things in their experience, and so when they think they've caught the I, they actually have not caught the I. They've only caught some feeling or thought that they've identified as the I, and they keep going on chasing like that with sufficient intensity and concentration, with the sufficient quietude of mind. What they thought was the I disappears and is replaced with the truth. In both cases, in the case of a sort of qualified seeker, in the traditional Advaita Vedanta case, and the case with Maharishi, of someone who's sort of on the path and gets to a certain point, quietude of mind is critical and key. But it's not enough, because mere quietude of mind is still changeable. It can come and go, and that's why one could be engaged in sitting meditation with your eyes closed in a state of bliss for a long time. It's not going to actually get rid of ignorance. Ignorance being the key point, the destruction of ignorance. And what is that ignorance? Ignorance is of the nature that I am the body and the mind, that I am the experiencer and the doer. To get rid of that ignorance, you have to discern away the unchanging, either through inquiry or through surrender, which comes to the same thing. Because when you surrender all that's changing, what's left? You have to need to discern away all the thoughts that you are surrendering. You have to discern away the mind and the body that you are surrendering. And it's that act of discernment that generates knowledge. It's that act of discernment that destroys ignorance. So I want to read you a little passage from Shankara's Brahma Sutra Bhashya, his commentary in the Brahma Sutra, is one of his most famous works. So Adi Shankara, of course, is the great compiler and synthesizer of Advaita Vedanta, And so he says, once the scriptures have declared Brahman to be the first cause, reasoning, etc., may be taken advantage of insofar as they do not contradict the scriptures, but rather supplement them in ascertaining the sense of the Vedanta texts. So here he's saying clearly, right, this is the emphasis on scriptural knowledge, that the self cannot be attained just purely by reasoning. You can sort of come up with really good plausibility as to why the self might exist, but you can't get a guarantee. You have to see for yourself. Actually, even scriptural knowledge is not enough, right? Scriptural knowledge is a pointer for inner investigation, an inner investigation that does not take place ultimately through logic. Logic can be used to help understand the pointing of the scriptures, but it is not in itself the inner investigation that's being referred to. The inner investigation that's being referred to is the quiet looking inward at the eye. So anyway, he says this kind of reasoning must include the hearing of the texts, thinking about their meaning, and meditation on them. So you're thinking, traditionally speaking, you're thinking of how it is the case that what you really are is not all these changeable things. You're not the body, not the mind. You aren't the objects of perception, obviously. You are not limited to either the waking or the dreaming or the deep sleep state. You're none of those three, right? You're not your memories. You're not your regrets. You're not your desires. You're not your fears. You're not your relationships. None of those things are you, right? So you cut away all those things. These are aids to discernment. Cutting away all those things, therefore, you are the stainless self, which is of the nature of bliss and fullness and consciousness. But again, those are just words. So to look within at the eye and to understand, right? So you think about the reasoning, traditionally speaking, you think about the reasoning, but then you actually have to understand what it means by looking within. So therefore, he says, this leads to intuition, right? So thinking, hearing the texts, contemplating them, and meditating on them is not enough, right? In a pure mind, when you do that, to comprehend the texts, you will have to understand to what they refer, which is to say, to the self, which means you will have to examine your own experience and see, when you push away all the changeable components, what is left. Look and see. That's the only way to understand the import of the scriptures. And from that looking, which will come from hearing and thinking and meditating, you get an intuition which goes beyond the thinking. It goes beyond the reasoning. It is not simply telling yourself that I am stainless, complete Brahman or self. That is merely a thought. The actual intuition that it refers to is not of that character. It's not of that verbal character. So by intuition, he says, it's meant that mental modification of the mind which destroys our ignorance about Brahman. When ignorance is destroyed by this mental modification in the form of Brahman, Brahman, which is self-luminous, reveals itself. Okay, so this is very, very similar to Maharishi's method, because Maharishi's method is you quiet the mind through inquiry or surrender. When the mind is still, you engage in that process of discernment. Actually, I mean, to get it to that stillness, self-inquiry and surrender is you're already discerning, right? You're using that process of discernment to get the mind to a certain stillness. And that stillness can come from other things as well, right? The stillness can come from regulation of your habits in various ways. There are various things that go along with increasing stillness, right? Morality increases stillness of mind. you're engaging in less conflict with the world, inside and outside, right? And my take on the psychology of emotion is being honest about what you want ultimately increases stillness of mind dramatically. That it's the key to stillness of mind. But stillness of mind isn't sufficient. You could be in meditation for a long time with a still mind, it's not sufficient. One has to look at the stillness of mind and discern who or what is experiencing that stillness. Even that stillness has to be discerned away as the final thought. That stillness, that bliss, is a reflection. What is it a reflection of? And what it's a reflection of cannot be fully stated. I mean, it can be stated as Brahman and, all the characteristics, but what does that mean? It's something very immediate. So the mind has to be kept in that quiet place, and in that quiet place, who lives in that quiet place? Who is the observer of that quietude? When the mind is still, when there are no thoughts, who is it that notices? Where is the noticer? That's the act of discernment. That's the true jnana yoga. So you have a kind of somewhat scripturally assisted process with the traditional Advaita Vedanta, and you have a more direct to the point process with Ramana Maharshi. But they actually come to exactly the same point, which is that one must look within their experience and discern what is changing away. Slicing that away, looking towards what is aware of, by looking towards what is aware of all of those changing things. What is aware of them, what is aware even of the stillness, which can't be stated, but is known intuitively, is the self. Because when one chases the I cannot be found, and one goes through that narrow passage into the glorious opening. That's what Ramana Maharshi called the I-I, the self-luminous I-I. One first brings the mind to stillness through various means, including inquiry or surrender, but not limited to them. But that's not enough. Then the final act of discernment must be made, which is going to lift one up out of the usual subject-object perspective and reveal that which was always there. That is what they call the Brahmakara Vritti. That's what Shankara called it in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya. The thought, the thought of Brahman, thought of the form of Brahman that comes and destroys ignorance, which is the nature of forgetfulness. It's very much like in a way, looking at a wall, okay? So imagine there's a wall and it's covered with all kinds of posters and stamps and paintings, dirt, this, that, and the other, right? And someone's saying, well, notice the wall. Well, if you didn't know what a wall was, really, you might not be able to figure out what the wall was because it's covered with all this stuff, right? So then you laboriously remove all the stuff as much as you can. That would be equivalent to stilling the mind, okay? So now you have a relatively much clearer wall, which might be more pleasant to look at, but that's not enough, right? So what is that that remains once all the stuff has been taken off, right? What is that? You know, you're staring at it and 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 saying, well, what is it? What is it? What is it? Right? It's so obvious. It's actually right there. It's the wall. But because you're not used to seeing it, because you're not used to thinking in that way, you know, it's not really a thought, of course. It's misleading to say it's a thought, but it's the usual perspective that's holding you in chains and preventing you from seeing the obvious, which is that all the stuff on the wall, whether the wall is clear, the wall has stuff on it, the wall is the wall is the wall, and you've been looking at it the whole time. So to discern through that act of discernment, to say, you know what, whether the paintings are on it or the paintings are off it, or whether the wall is dirty or clean, what is that which is constant? And that's understood through the eye. That's the hole through which the light of the self shines. So you follow it back, right? What is this eye? Right? What is this wall? What is the wall? What is the wall? What is the wall? Right? You're looking at it the whole time. But through that stillness of mind, it gives you the best chance to have that inquiry succeed. Still the mind, ask the question, attempt to discern away all the changeable components. This can't be it. 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 Because all of these are cognized by the I, so it cannot be the self. So what is the I then? What is the self? What is that which is aware of all these modified things? What is it? No one can say it. You have to look. When you look with sufficient intensity, it'll become apparent.